My mother died when I was 11 years old of a cancer she had for more than 10 years. There was never a moment in my life when I didn't know there was an imminent tragedy hanging over my family. And I saw my dad cry for the very first time, and I realized instantly the power of the medium. And at 12 years old, I wanted to be a filmmaker. My father, after she died, had a fairly strict curfew, but he permitted me to watch old movies on TV till 1 a.m. on a school night, or take me out to the movies that would end at midnight. I wanted to be a feature filmmaker in the tradition of Alfred Hitchcock and John Ford and Howard Hawks. But when I went to Hampshire College, they reminded me quite correctly that there's much more drama in what is and what was than anything the human imagination can dream of. They had instilled in us a sense of being self-initiated in everything we did, and I didn't want to become an apprentice to any other film company, so I started my own. And I found myself becoming a documentary filmmaker, trying to tell stories and using American history to tell those stories that I wanted to tell. And when you look back at it, the job that I try to do is to wake the dead, and it doesn't seem too far a leap to understand from that early decision to be a filmmaker who I really want to wake up. And the first film I chose to do was on the history of the building of the Brooklyn Bridge and its important symbolism. And I would go around trying to raise money and try to invent a new way of doing filmmaking, of bringing the past alive through energetically exploring old photographs. And people would turn me down left and right, saying this child, I looked about 12 years old, wanted to sell them the Brooklyn Bridge, ha ha ha. And everywhere I went, it was sort of that same situation. But I kept at it, and after a while moved out of New York City to rural New Hampshire and began to figure out how to tell a story in history, how to make history come alive, how to make history not homework. And the first film was done, and the very first thing that happened to it, it was nominated for an Academy Award as Best Feature Documentary, and it not only vindicated 5 or more years of effort, but it also reminded me how much sticking with something that was really tough was what was going to get you anywhere in the world. Once I got the modicum of funding, I remember I got $1,000 from Meade Esposito, who was the Brooklyn Democratic boss. I went up to his second floor office and was handed an envelope. They just wanted to be involved with that. Lots of different money coming in, $1,000, $1,500 here, $1,500 there. But I just spent a lot of time filming the bridge in every time of day and night, in every season, from every possible vantage, trying to bring it back. And meanwhile, exploring the vast archive that existed at the City of New York and various archives around the country that detailed the extraordinary exploration. But what I didn't know was how to put it together, and that involved just going off and figuring it out, moving to rural New Hampshire where I could live on nothing, and waking up every morning in a little, going out to a little cabin, just a very small one, lighting a wood stove, waiting 3 or 4 hours for it to warm up the place where the film wouldn't just so brittle, wouldn't just break every time you tried to touch it, and worked for a year and a half trying to invent what has been now called the Ken Burns effect, which is a way of energetically exploring still photographs, of adding complex sound effects and period music, of using not just a third-person narrator, what we in the business call the voice of God, but also first-person voices, reading journals and diaries and love letters and newspaper accounts that give the experience of the past something that feels real and feels human. And all of those things, getting David McCullough, who had written a book about the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, to narrate the film, getting Julie Harris, the distinguished actress, to read off-camera first-person voices, and then using her to attract other voices, we sort of put together this film that, lo and behold, was nominated for an Oscar. And the way I found out was that I came home in the middle of February. I noticed that the wood stove that heated my own home was out, and I sort of swore, but then noticed after I'd taken off my coat that there were a lot of messages, and they were all hang-ups. And then finally, some person called from the AP, please call, from the Associated Press in Boston now, and then the Academy wanted me to call back, and then finally a friend called and said, I just heard the news, congratulations. And I then realized the house was still freezing, so I ran out, jumping up and down, forgot to put my coat on, loaded my arms with a big load of wood, and came back sort of singing, missed a patch of ice, tripped on it, and fell into a snowbank. And I remember that my shirt had pulled up, and snow was melting and trickling down my back into my pants. I thought this was a gift from God, that I'd just been nominated for an Academy Award. There was no other filmmaker on earth who'd had this humiliating and humbling experience. Nobody had ever seen it, but it ought to be a word to the wise. So after that film, and then other films had been nominated, nominated. I never left that house in New Hampshire, and I have stayed there being humbled by remembering that the real thing is what you put into the film and not what kind of glory comes afterwards. For many years after the Brooklyn Bridge's extraordinary and unexpected success, for more than 10 years, I kept on my desk 2, 3, or 5-inch thick binders filled with the hundreds and hundreds of rejections I had from that film. And I think the thing that it reminded me and continues to remind me is that nothing will be given to you, that what is required, particularly in this medium, is a degree of perseverance and a kind of sense of knowing who you are and your willingness to struggle hard and to sacrifice for those ideals. And I'm sure there are many, many better filmmakers, but what I had was perseverance, and what I did was stick with it until I'd accomplished it. And I always remember that Brooklyn Bridge gave me that first break, the possibility to see not only that I could make a film, that was important, but that I could also withstand all the friction that will inevitably come up whenever anyone wants to make a film, and that's by far the best takeaway.